So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the ESTA implementation for payroll systems. We've talked a lot about ESTA, what it is, where we're going, but now we need to know what do we got to do to put it in action. So thanks for joining us this afternoon. So just real quickly, some introductions. If you've joined HR Collaborative before at any of our other webinars or our cafes, you probably recognize me. I am Lisa Brown, the Vice President of Client Services here at HR Collaborative. Been in the industry for over 15 years in manufacturing, retail, and spent the last 10 in consulting, particularly holding nearly every role in the HR space before coming into leadership. So I know exactly what many of you are facing when you're working on implementing these changes. One of our panelists and guests here today is jfox. He is the HCM Sales Officer at Mercantile Bank. He helps small businesses and HR leaders achieve their goals through Mercantile Bank's seamless end-to-end payroll and human capital management solution, MercForce. Also joining us here today is Mary Meat, HCM Implementation Supervisor. With nearly 20 years at Mercantile Bank in the MercForce department, Mary leverages her experience to lead teams responsible for successful implementation of the HCM solutions provided. So without further ado, we're going to dive in. First, let's talk a little bit about how we got here. How did we get where we are here today? So just real quick rewind. In 2018, the Michigan legislature adopted the voter-initiated ballot proposals that call for earned sick time, or what we're ESTA as it's referred to. Also had some provisions around the Improved Workforce Act, which impacts minimum wage. But both of those were adopted, amended, and then went into effect in March of 2019. Fast forward to last summer, the Supreme Court ruled that the legislature's adopt and amend approach was unconstitutional, and it ordered the reinstatement of the laws the way they were written back in 2018. And those are scheduled to go into effect, I think it's next Friday, 2 Fridays from now, on the February 21st, 2025. Now, there have been some proposed legislative changes. So last month, the House of Representatives introduced bills that would provide exemptions for seasonal and part-time employees, particularly those that work less than 25 hours a week for 25 weeks a year. It also allowed businesses with less than 50 employees to now be categorized as small employers, therefore not having to comply. It also allowed it front loading with a minimum of 72 hours front loaded to suffice in place of that unlimited carryover. And then it increased the tracking increment to 1 hour to use in 1 hour increments, where now it's the smallest increment that your system can accommodate. The Senate also had some thoughts on both ESTA and the Improved Workforce Act. Particularly, the Senate introduced bills that does help define small business. However, they think it's small business as any organization with less than 25 employees, so a little difference there. And those individuals, that average has to be consistent for 32 weeks out of the year. It does allow for front loading, again, those 72 hours. So it looks like they're in agreement there, and that would meet the requirements. It does allow allow carryover, but can be capped at 288 hours per year, where now it's unlimited. It's a continual accrual. And again, increases the increments of use to 1 hour. So nothing has changed there yet. Those are just the proposed changes. The House passed theirs, has the bills in front of the Senate. The Senate is now being pressured to either approve them as written or to revise them to accommodate for what their recommendations are. They're not moving very quickly, so we're not anticipating a lot of any of these changes to be impacting or to go into effect prior to the February 21 effective date. So what we brought Jake and Mary here today is to help us understand how do we move forward with what the act is as of today, and what are some strategies or what do we need to focus on for implementation in order to get ready to implement as it exists. So with that, Jake, I welcome you to take the mic and take it from here.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everybody. As Lisa mentioned, my name is Jake Fox. I am the Human Capital Management and Payroll Sales Officer and Consultant here at Mercantile Bank. Quick background, Lisa mentioned this as well, but here at Mercantile, we brand our payroll and human capital management offering as Mercforce. So through a partnership with nationally ranked and recognized payroll and HCM vendor iSolve, we are delivering the iSolve technology here locally in West Michigan, all local sales, local implementation, and local customer support. We've been in the payroll and human capital management space dating back to 2001. We've been partnered with iSolve since 2015. And we've grown from us being our own single client way back when to serving nearly 500 companies in Michigan and around the country. I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide here. I'd like to start by sharing just a little bit about what we here at Mercantile are doing to help our clients implement some of these changes as it pertains to ESTA. So back in December, we did roll out a survey to all of our clients, and the survey was intended to just ask some questions about our clients' current accrual plans, all in effort to understand if we need to help them build new policies to ensure they will be in compliance with ESTA. So about 75% of our respondents, and we've gotten most of these surveys back by now, have said they will be moving forward with an accrual policy to accrue those ESTA hours, whereas about 25% have said they will move forward with a front-loaded policy and provide those 72 hours up front. As a payroll processor, we do believe that setting up an accrual plan will be the easiest route with a little bit less administrative burden and some more peace of mind to know that the hours are accurate as we progress through the course of the year. However, most HCM softwares are fully capable of handling either the accrual or the front-loaded policy here. For our clients that do choose to do front-loading versus the accrual, we, through our partner in iSolve, do have access to what's called the custom report writer feature. So we can create a custom report to help with balance tracking if you are going to front load. So everyone should be aware that if you elect to front load these ESTA hours, you still need to be cognizant of the balance your employees should have earned over the course of the year, especially as we get closer to the end of the year. Of course, if everybody in your organization works a standard 40 hours a week, there's not a ton to worry about if they're going to get to that 72 hours or not. But of course, that is often not going to be the case, especially if you have any hourly staff in your organization. Important to remember that ESTA hours must apply and be counted to all hours worked, including those overtime hours. So you need to be careful if you front load those ESTA hours, because in theory, you could earn more than the 72 there. So the custom report that we can create can help administrators just keep an eye on the number of ESTA hours that employees should have earned as we progress through the year. And that number can then be compared back to the number of front-loaded hours that you grant your employees. So if an employee is short as time progresses, you can use the custom report to figure out, okay, now do we need to add some of these hours back to their bucket manually to ensure that they accrued all the hours that they should have earned throughout the course of the year. So that was a little bit about what we are doing to help our clients. I do want to talk holistically about just several advantages that HCM softwares have to help you make sure you are staying compliant as we navigate the challenges that ESTA is placing in front of us here. So kicking it off with usage monitoring. So HCM softwares can absolutely monitor sick leave usage, ensuring that the employees do not exceed the 72-hour annual limit for paid sick leave. As the law states today, you can limit your employees to take just 72 hours in a given 12-month period. As we do know also, there are no limitations on the number of hours that can be rolled over from year to year. So HCM softwares can help automate that rollover process if you do want to just carry those forward through the next year and not have to worry about it when the calendar does change. However, as Lisa mentioned, there are some changes going on out there, and one that says they may introduce a cap for how many hours you can earn into your bank, and putting that cap at 288 hours or 144 if you do choose to pay out any of those unused hours. So just keep an eye for any articles and updates there to see if we need to be placing any limits on the number of hours that are going to be rolled over. And just a little tip from us here as an HCM vendor, if you don't allow your employees to at least view their accrual balances in the software, or even on a pay stub for that matter, this is a great time to begin to allow them to view those balances, and maybe even an even better time to go ahead and allow them to start requesting some of those hours off through the software. We touched a little bit on the reporting and analytics piece, outside of the custom report writing features. All HCM software should have advanced reporting features that can provide insights into maybe some sick leave usage patterns, just helping employers identify trends and make informed decisions about managing their own workforce. With the way ESTA reads today, you can't ask your employees what the leave was for if it's under 3 consecutive days, but maybe you still want to start to track that, or you notice, hey, they're taking 4 hours of ESTA time every other Friday on payday, and you want to use some reports and analytics to ensure that there isn't something going on there. For employee self-service, if you're unfamiliar with employee self-service or ESS, this is simply just the portal that employees can use to view their pay stubs, their W-2s, update their address or direct deposit, and in the same space can typically view accrual balances and request the time off. So most HCM softwares are going to have these ESS portals, allowing them to easily request the sick leave and check their accrued balances and all the leave history and whatnot. So as the law states today, ESTA must be able to be taken in those 1-hour increments, as Lisa mentioned. So if it's not how your policies are set up today, now is kind of the time to go ahead and make sure that your software is capable of going down to that 1 hour and make that update accordingly. We at Mercantile have certainly seen a number of our clients elect to add our time and attendance module as well for a couple of reasons. So with ESTA, it's now more important than ever to make sure that your hours are entirely accurate. So allowing your staff to begin recording their hours and punching in and out and keeping those records down to the minute, maybe thinking about changing your rounding rules, whatever the case may be, just to ensure that your accrual plan is 100% accurate, and depending on your policies and your culture, not over awarding those ESTA hours. And again, I mentioned it earlier, but just allowing your staff to begin requesting the time off if they couldn't do so already. We really just think that's going to ease some of the administrative burden and just creates an audit trail for all those requests and approvals behind the scenes.
Yeah, really great points, Jake. Just wanted to add on there with, we're really hoping that the 1-hour increments amendment does come in place, but you had mentioned rounding and making sure that your policies round appropriately, because the way that the law is written today is that time can be taken in increments as small as your time tracking will allow. So if you track in 1 hour or 1 minute increments or 6-minute increments, in theory, you would have to allow your employees to take time in those smaller increments. So looking at those rounding requirements to make sure that, it's as administratively streamlined as we possibly can. So that really great feature and a really great reminder to take a look at those.
Yeah, exactly. Rounding rules are important, but I think we've seen a handful of clients elect to change those and either make them a little more favorable for the employer side, or some making them more favorable for the employee side as well. So it kind of just depends on what your current policies are and how you want to move forward, but certainly something to consider there.
Helping them walk through that. Thanks.
A couple more points on this slide here. So under ESTA today, the law states that you must provide a written notice of your employees' rights under ESTA. So just helping educate them on these changes and letting them know what the company is doing to help with these. So any HCM software, iSolve included, you should have the ability to, if you want, to send out a notice to certain groups of employees or company-wide that maybe you have a PDF or a Word doc on there just explaining, hey, here's what the law states and here's what our new policies are. And you should, in most HCM softwares, be able to require the electronic consent or acknowledgement with the date and timestamp that your employees have opened the notice, B, understand it, and C, that they acknowledge and keep that date and timestamp on there. So if you ever have an employee that comes back to you and says, well, I didn't know that was a policy, you always have that date and timestamp to let them know, well, you did acknowledge that you understand those changes. And last but not least here, with labor law posters, a lot of HCM vendors, us included here, do sell labor law posters. We can have those sent on a monthly basis or whatever you like to do there. We get ours in a partnership with a company called Poster Elite, but with all these ESTA and minimum wage law changes, all HCM vendors are making the necessary updates to go ahead and include those changes to help businesses stay in compliance. So we talked a little bit about what Mercantile is doing, the survey. We've talked holistically about what HCM softwares are doing to, help businesses stay in compliance here. So this slide and the next are just some food for thought and some takeaway items for everybody to think about as we chug along towards the February 21st deadline here. So Lisa had mentioned, today it's 10 employees is that threshold to determine if you're over or under. That may go to 25, that may go to 50, we don't know. For now, we're going to operate as if it will stay at 10, but determine if you're under 10 or over 10, because that's going to dictate, do you need to have 72 hours paid, or do you need to have 30 paid and maybe 42 unpaid, whatever the case may be. That's easy step one in the process. But then we just encourage you to take a step back and just evaluate your current policies, identify things like, does your current accrual or PTO plan already comply with that stuff? If it does, do you really need to make any changes? If not, what changes do we need to make here? So, and again, determine if you want that accrual plan or the front-loaded plan. Understand what things can be done behind the scenes if you do choose to front load to make sure that everyone's getting enough hours. Determine when you want that plan to be effective as well. Do you want it to start right on February 21st? Can your HCM company get it implemented before then or by then even? Because we are approaching that deadline quickly. And important to note as well that you can, if you move forward with the accrual plan, there should be measures and things we can do in the HCM software to backdate the accrual to actually start on the first of the year as well, which could, kind of boost the bucket that they have for the ESTA hours come February 21st here. We talked about the 1 hour increment, but yeah, go ahead and determine what level of increment you want your employees to be able to take these ESTA hours in while, we said it should go to 1 hour, but maybe the law stands where you have to do it as low as your software can go. If it does go to 1 hour, that doesn't mean you can't do less. You could still choose to let your employees take it in 30-hour or 30-minute increments or 15-minute increments, whatever you do want to do there. You'll also want to determine the 12-month time frame that you're going to kind of measure this by. And Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but our understanding is that you can earn up to 72 in the year or more if there's overtime and you're accruing, and you can only take 72 in a year here. But for example, you could put all your salary folks on a 12-month calendar time frame and your hourly folks on an anniversary date. But the determination must be uniform for different groups or statuses of employees. So all salary or all office and all admin have to be on a similar basis there.
Yep. You can create policies that are applicable based on status or grouping. It can't be treated on an individual basis. But yeah, your measurement period, your 12-month period, even the provisions of the policy itself can be, can differ by those, again, those classifications of employees. All of them have to comply with ESTA, whether you're doing one combined bucket for one group and split buckets for the other. All of them have to comply, and it doesn't eliminate the tracking requirements.
Yep. And the beauty is, since we're already categorizing the employees in departments or different classes, there's just simple eligibility rules we put behind the scenes that will make sure we're measuring those different groups on different frequencies as well, if that's the route everyone decides to go. You'll also want to go ahead and determine if you want these ESTA accruals to be based on actual hours worked or for any assortment of hours. So do you want to include paid time off in the accrual plan? And to me, this kind of goes hand in hand with the determination of front loading your accruing. And to me, it's another advantage of going with the accrual, because as the employees will not earn the ESTA hours for unworked hours, we can just put those eligibility rules behind the scenes, blocking the employee from earning time that they don't actually work on site there. You'll also want to think about if you're going to pay out these unused ESTA time upon termination. And as the law reads today, it's not required, but as we alluded to, there could be a change coming that could introduce having to roll over or not having to roll over, depending on if you choose to pay those out or not. And I think that's another one that kind of you have to think about if you're going to do the front loading or accruing, because if you front load the 72 hours and then you terminate somebody in March, what are you going to do to pay those hours out in the middle of the calendar year? I think now also, and I know we touched on it a little bit, but now it's just a great time to evaluate your current time and attendance system, whether it is in your HCM software today, maybe it's through a third party, or maybe you just don't have one. And now is kind of a good time to start to think about pursuing one so we can be 100% accurate in the hours that we're tracking for our hourly staff. If you do have one, do you already allow the employees to go in and request time off? If not, is now a good time to start? Just all good things to, just think about now as we're approaching these new sets of laws. Just evaluate the actual system that you're using to monitor these things here. Last but not least, just a small point. If you do want to recategorize the way your general ledger is structured in the general ledger report for journal entries and such that you're getting out of the payroll software, this is a good time to also reach out to your vendor to maybe tweak the GL so that maybe you want those ESTA hours to fall into their own bucket for vacation or just a different wage account or whatever the case may be there. Of course, wrapping up here, leverage the tools and services that organizations like HR Collaborative offer, and also go ahead and leverage the HR tools you may already have access to through your HCM subscription. Do you have somebody at your vendor that you can have on call to bounce some of these things off? And just encourage getting multiple opinions and talking to the experts who are kind of staying on top of this law on day in and day out here. But it's kind of like once you feel that you have a good sense of what you'd like to accomplish and the changes you'd like to make, it's time to reach out to your payroll vendor to get those changes implemented. And the time to do so is absolutely right now. Be aware that while national payroll companies do have local sales reps, sometimes local implementation and support, not all providers will be acutely aware of this Michigan-specific law. So super important to have your plan in place before you reach out to your vendor. So working with, like I said, people with HR Collaborative or with us or anybody here locally to make sure you have some good policies in place before you reach out to your payroll vendor. That is my content. I think at this point, Lisa, we can probably start to take some questions here.
Yeah, and that's a lot of great information, Jake. It's nice to see that there are tools out there that have put some thought and some development behind tracking ESTA. Michigan's not the first state to do this, right? There are other states that have earned sick time in different buckets, but what I had been hearing from clients is that, hey, our system hasn't even heard of ESTA. They don't know what they're doing with it. They don't know how to build this. So it's great to hear that there are some, solutions out there that have put, invested the time and effort into developing tools and really thinking through the impact to employers. I just want to take this opportunity to let attendees know that if you have a question for Jake or myself or Mary, who supervises the technical side of implementation, please use the Q&A function, drop it in there. We'll try to get through as many as we can. We already have some that have popped in throughout the presentation thus far. So go ahead and drop them in the Q&A and we'll get to as many of those as we can in the time we have remaining. So the first question we got, Jake, it is a little policy related, so I'm happy to weigh in here. But of course, if you have insight on how you're walking clients through building it in their HCM or tracking it, please hop in. So the first question was, if we have a PTO policy greater than the law, so I'm assuming more generous than law, providing more time than the minimum required, will that suffice to comply with ESTA? That's a bit general question, but if you're providing more time than what is required to be accrued for ESTA or to be given by ESTA, yes, from a time perspective, that would be compliant. The flip side is how readily is it available? Because with ESTA, it requires that time be available as soon as it's accrued. So if they can only use so much, within a certain time period, if it limits the usage of it at all or requires an approval process, that would not be considered compliant with ESTA, because ESTA doesn't require, you can't require an employee to submit time, even if it's foreseeable, for approval, employees merely have to notify you that they're using ESTA for their absence, that it's an ESTA reason. And you can't require documentation of that, like Jake had mentioned earlier, until they've been gone for at least 3 consecutive days. A follow-up to that question was, what if the employee uses all of their PTO bank for vacation and then gets sick? Do we need to give additional paid time? No. So if the employee uses all of their PTO for non-ESTA related reasons, but we have said that our PTO bank is a combination of time and accruals, and we have all the provisions that ESTA requires, but you can use it for ESTA covered reasons and all these other reasons. You are only responsible as an employer to provide the minimum of 1 hour for every 30 hours worked for that employee to use. What they decide to use it on, if you allow them to use it for reasons outside of ESTA's minimum requirements, that you are not required to provide them any additional paid time. Any insight, Jake, anything that you're hearing differently from clients that maybe ask the same or similar question?
No, I think I would answer that question the exact same. We can leverage Mary here too if she has anything different. I know enough to be dangerous. Mary might know a little more of the acute details on the implementation, but I think you covered that one well.
Definitely chime in if you're hearing different things than what I'm hearing, because different audiences for sure. Another question, and this I'd love to hear. I know you had said that you did your survey and you had about 75% that were doing the accrual, 25% doing front loading, but then they have to do the true up, which can be administratively burdensome. An attendee asked for companies, most employees, once they've been there for a year or more, they get at least 2 weeks of PTO. So they're over the 72-hour minimum. So maybe they're increasing those less than 1 year. The question was, if they have 2 weeks of PTO as their current company policy, are they just changing that to be ESTA and then calling it good, essentially taking the time that was formerly known as PTO and now calling it ESTA time? Or are you seeing companies keep their PTO accrual and add the ESTA accrual in addition to that? I'm curious what you all are seeing, and Mary, what you've talked with clients about as well.
Yeah, I think we've seen a mix for sure. We've definitely seen some change it from that maybe it was called PTO, for example. Now it's called vacation. Or I've even seen one where it's like there's one overarching bucket up top, and then that one's called vacation. Underneath it is PTO1 and PTO2, or PTO and ESTA that roll up to that same balance. So and kind of pull all from one bucket. So you should be able to get really creative with the way that you do it. I don't know, maybe Mary, you know what has been more common, but I definitely know we've seen all different kind of variations of the way we're changing the name, or kind of just changing the way where the numbers are actually pulling from in those different buckets, if that makes sense.
I think I've got probably a pretty good split of clients that are borrowing some or all of the accrual time. Again, to your point, like even a full-time person who works 40 hours a week, never has overtime, whatnot, earns like 69.5 hours each year, right? So not even quite the 72. The 72 front loading, you're covering them,
Yeah.
And with a little bit more. I've seen some of our clients that are like, hey, we're going to, reduce the accrual for PTO, but add that equivalent amount to ESTA. Others have said, oh, we're going to take maybe 40 hours, from the accrual to offset some of the cost of ESTA. Others have said, no, we're just going to add the bucket in addition to what they're currently accruing. So there's definitely, there's a mix, but
I think to me, it's just the easiest to track if we just keep it totally separate. But then, of course, that just comes with the challenge of the extra step for educating your employees, really making sure they understand what the differences are and how they're accruing it and such. So it might seem like the easy button to go ahead and just put it all in one bucket. I think from what we're seeing, at least for client administrators, especially in the small business space, it's a lot easier to kind of just split those things out, track them separately. If you ever get an audit, it's all right there and not combined. You have to don't do the math to separate it out and that kind of thing. So
yeah. And that's a great response, because that was another question. It's like, are people accruing them separately, or are they accruing it together and then just the use is separated? And really from an administrative side, if you are ever to be audited and have to substantiate it, if you have 2 separate buckets, it's a lot, it's a lot easier to pull that pull that information out.
Yeah. It's still common to have 10 days of front-loaded PTO and then have an accrual plan for the same employee to accrue ESTA hours too. So you can kind of do it both ways and whatever will make the most sense.
Yeah, very true. All right, we got lots of questions now. So another question, can you use ESTA hours towards an employee arriving late for work? The answer would be yes, you can, if the employee notifies you that they'd like to use ESTA to cover their tardy. If they say, yes, I want, ESTA, I was 45 minutes or an hour late for work, I want to use 1 hour of ESTA to cover that because I was gone for an ESTA related reason. You charge that 1 hour, you plug that hour in. You cannot force them to use it. If they say, no, it was not for an ESTA covered reason, I do not want to use ESTA, or I don't have time to cover it, you can then hold them accountable to your attendance policies. If it is an ESTA qualifying tardy, then you can't take any adverse action. But if they state, and I would highly encourage that you, like Jake mentioned earlier, using your system saying that, hey, you, the employee, indicated that, this is not an ESTA covered absence, or that if they talk to the manager, like, this is not an ESTA covered reason that I was tardy, my car didn't start, then you can hold them accountable to your attendance and time tracking policies. If they say it is, then you have to take a step back and kind of use that honor system. So good question. Question from another guest: what are people doing with salaried employees? How are they? What are they doing for time tracking? How are they tracking hours worked for salaried employees?
Gotcha. I think to us, the easiest way is just to assume 40 hours worked and then accrue it that way. We have seen some clients start to make their salary staff actually put their hours in as well. Still getting paid for the regular 40 hours, but putting in the tracking behind the scenes, because you might still pay somebody for 40 hours, but they might have a day of vacation in there. So you want them to actually enter their hours. So if you're doing an accrual policy, they're not going to earn hours for those days off, if that makes sense. But for the most part, I think what we're seeing is everyone is just kind of going with your salary. You just work your 40 hours and we do the accrual as you would. And the salary are also fine to front load. I think that's probably a little more common for salary folks to get their front loaded hours anyways. But we have seen a mix of both. And when it is the standard 40 hours, and I guess this doesn't apply just to salary folks, but behind the scene, there's kind of two ways we can do it, because, for 30 hours worked, you get your hour. But then if you work 40 hours in a week, what do you do with that extra 10 hours? Do you want to give the employee 1.3 hours on that one pay period, or do you want that 10 hours to roll over to the following pay period? So if they work 40 hours again, it's actually 50 hours the following week. So just kind of determining, do you always want them to get one flat hour every pay period, or the 1.3 and have the true accrual as well?
Yeah, that is a great clarifying point, because the way the act is written is that we must give them 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. So you can give them nothing at 29. If they only work 29 hours, they have 29 hours worked. So they don't actually earn that 1 hour until the next pay period. But you could also do the true calculation, which, over time they would have accrued the same amount of time, but you could say, oh, that's 1.33 hours this pay period, and then 1.33 hours next week. Instead of waiting, and then instead of doing 1 hour, then when they hit that, 60-hour mark, then they get the 2 hours. Yeah, it is another, interesting language in the way that the act is written. Oh, geez, a lot of great questions. The question on confirming clarity on rollover, unlimited, and how much is required to be paid out. So right now it's unlimited rollover. So if they accrue it, any amount unused continues to accrue and roll over. So if they use time, it doesn't continue to roll, but whatever they accrue continues to roll over, carry over from year to year. There's no cap on it. The way that the act is written right now, there is no payout requirement. So ESTA does not have to be paid out upon separation, whether it's voluntary or involuntary. It is not an earned benefit. If you're going to roll ESTA up under your current PTO policy, and your current PTO policy does state payout at separation, you're going to want to clarify what that cap is, which I think is what Jake was talking about earlier, is really take a look at your policy, because if you just bundle it into your current policy, which allows for payout, you're then obliging yourself as an organization to have to pay out on ESTA as well, because you've incorporated it in that PTO policy. Can get expensive. How does it work when seasonal employee requests time off? They only work as needed or on call. So when could they use their sick time? So the way the way the act is written, they can use their earned sick time for scheduled hours. So if they go 3 months without being scheduled to work anything, they can't voluntarily just say, hey, I want to use 16 hours of ESTA because I've accrued it. It has to be for scheduled time worked. I've also gotten the question where, well, our employees make their own schedule. Well, then I think that this would be a good time to put a practice in place that even though you let them make their own schedule, maybe they're home health aides, maybe they're hairstylists, cosmetologists, where they just make their schedule to align with their clients' needs. Absolutely. We don't want to make it inconvenient for them. But once they've made their schedule, they should then share it with you. So if something does happen where they want to use ESTA, their ESTA time for a covered reason, you have documentation say, oh yeah, they were scheduled or they were planning on working that day. So we should pay out on that. It's not to be paid in addition to hours worked for the week. Have you run into any tricky questions or requests on that, Jake, or maybe when it comes to implementation or HCM management?
I actually haven't really heard questions on the scheduling piece. I just learned something new there, where if for scheduled hours only, but that's a really interesting point to think about. For if you just set your own schedule, what are the parameters around it? Like, could it just be, okay, these are our defined business hours, so you can take it for any point during these defined business hours? I'm not sure, but yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's that, it's gonna have to, employers that don't have designated work, like set work weeks or work hours, may need to evaluate that. If they're going to limit the usage of their ESTA to just hours that they were scheduled. Now, that's the bare minimum. If employers are more generous and they'll allow them to use ESTA on a day that they weren't normally scheduled, that's on you as an organization to decide that. You can absolutely be more generous. My perspective is coming from, this is the minimum requirement. You can absolutely be more lax on that.
And I can say in education, we have not had anybody ask that question so far as scheduling and the business hours of the employer. So we have had them reduce vacation hours or PTO policies by the ESTA amount, so that it kind of equals the same, because if they're using their existing PTO policy, it has to meet all of the criteria. So that includes something like they don't have to give you notice. If you require notice now for them to request PTO, and you want to use your PTO plan for ESTA, then that requirement kind of goes away.
Yeah.
So in most cases, they're splitting it out.
Yeah, it does. It really relaxes your PTO, the restrictions you put on PTO, because like you said, Mary, there, you can't require approval because they merely just have to notify you under ESTA. Like, I'm going to just take the next 2 weeks off, calling it ESTA. Okay, boss? There's nothing they can do. So those are some things to think about. Most folks won't, aren't going to use it that way, but there's always one, right? Let's see. Oh my gosh, it's hard to pick. We pay in quarter-hour increments, but our employees clock in at the exact time. Do we need to use the few minutes before start or end time, or can we accrue based on what we pay? For example, they clock in at 7:56. Do we accrue the 4 minutes, or is it or can they use the rounding?
My advice when I talk to employers is what benefits the employee, because that's usually what labor laws do. What is the most advantageous to the employee, and that's what you want to put into place. So I would say that if they're clocking in 4 minutes early, that you want to start tracking ESTA 4 minutes early.
Yeah, that is a really great question. So a lot of organizations do the rounding. I would take a look at, what Jake had said earlier, what are your rounding rules? some, organizations that round in 5-minute increments, okay, that's a little less impactful. If you're doing 15-minute increments, that can definitely get challenging. Because they can accrue, I worked at an employer that did, 15-minute increments. And so if you clocked in 8 minutes early, it would actually give you an extra 15 minutes on the front of your shift. If it was 7 minutes, it actually round it up. So you'd actually have 7 minutes less. So what you can do is accrue based on the hours worked based on that rounding. But you do want to be hesitant that if they're actually working, because it's based on actual hours worked,
Right.
they can accrue more. They could get that next 30 hours beforehand. So I would agree with Mary's advice that do whatever is the most employee friendly. If this means shoring up your timekeeping, like you can't punch in any earlier than 2 minutes before or 3 minutes before your shift begins because of rounding rules, you can adjust those. You just can't discipline them for having tardies or absences related to ESTA, but it doesn't mean you can't update your practices to allow for mitigation of those potential exceptions to the law.
Yeah, quick follow-up on that as well. This is kind of a question back at Mary, but with that same example, if you punch in 4 minutes early, if in that instance, say you had a rounding rule that rounds that up from 7:56 to 8 o'clock, Mary, can the system pay on the rounded but have the ESTA count on the actual time? I'm gonna guess no, but I'm curious.
No.
A great one.
No. Because it's looking at the actual punch time with the rounding rule. That's what the rounding rule is doing.
Yeah. I learned something today, Jake. I didn't even think that would be really tricky.
Yeah.
But yeah, even the systems have a hard time with that. Thanks, Mary. Company policy states that after 3 days of missed work due to an illness, or we're gonna just broaden this to ESTA covered reason, you need to bring a physician statement before you can return to work. Is the company obligated to pay for that physician invoice? In theory, under the Act, yes. You may be responsible as the employer if you're requiring that they get that to substantiate their ability to either return to work or substantiate the reason for absence that it was covered by ESTA. Then the employer may be, the fancy word, may be responsible, will likely be responsible for whatever copay is required. If the doctor has a fee for filling out a, fitness for duty form, the employee could seek reimbursement for those expenses from the employer. Those that are, concerned about this, what I would say is take a look at your policies and your reasons, and is it really necessary for them to fill, to have a physician's note? Provisions under ESTA they're not necessarily for a personal illness or a family member's illness that you would seek physician care for. It could be because there was a domestic violence situation or a behavioral issue with your child at school where they got suspended, so you didn't have anybody to care for them for those 3 days. Those would all be reasons under ESTA that you wouldn't necessarily need to go to a physician for documentation for. I know that the question was specifically if they give us the reason that it was illness. I would just be cautious that we're not then asking them to provide information that we wouldn't necessarily need to be aware of. If that time's available to them, my advice to most clients is, this isn't a ton of time. I mean, especially for your part-time folks that aren't going to be accruing as quickly. I'm really urging clients to try, to really go into it with assuming positive intent and kind of using that honor system that we're going to use it for the covered reasons. We all know that some folks are going to take advantage of it, but we really do want to kind of give the benefit of the doubt to the employee without making it difficult for them to use the benefit that's available to them. Unlimited sick time, does that suffice? Yes, it probably would. Your odds of being found outside of compliance or not providing the appropriate amount of time for folks to leverage for ESTA related reasons is probably minimal. However, just because you offer unlimited sick time does not mean you don't need to have some sort of record keeping and accrual. Unfortunately, The way the law is written is that even with unlimited sick time, you still have to accrue and track usage of the time. Now, maybe that will get relaxed over, over the year with modifications, but as of right now, as far as like the administration of it, easy, but you do have to have an accrual and tracking system for it. 90-day waiting period. We haven't talked about this one yet. So there is a 90-day waiting period. So new hires, they begin accruing on day one. So hours worked from day 1 to day 89, they accrue 1 hour for every 30 hours worked during that time period. But employers can have a 90-day waiting period where the time, the new hires can't use that time until they've been employed for 90 days to help mitigate some of that unnecessary expense if they don't retain them. Yes, it is only for new hires. It does not apply to current employee. You can't have a 90-day waiting period from February 21 for all your current employees. I'm sorry. And then anybody that started between now and February 21, you have to count any days worked, or any time prior to February 21. You do have to count those calendar days, not days worked, but calendar days towards those 90 days. So you could potentially delay theirs a little bit. And then the follow-up was, am I allowed to implement this for my current staff once accrual begins on 2/21? Are they able to use it once it's accrued? And the way that the act is written, they would be able to use it immediately upon accrual. Honestly, once they work that 30th hour in that first pay period, they could technically say, well, I'm going to take an hour of ESTA now. It's got to be available to them. I think the other thing with the 90-day waiting period for new hires, there's also a provision. If somebody were to terminate employment, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, if you rehire them within 6 months, you need to reinstate the bank of time that they accrued in their prior tenure. So 6 months and 1 day, you can start them over, but anytime before that, you have to keep this is another reason that record keeping, another important piece for the record keeping is being able to pull up that historic information that, may not be, if you're doing it manually, you can't just throw that piece of paper out once they, once they're gone. So any insight?
I also believe it carries over. So if you have multiple entities or locations and an employee transfers from one entity to another, the hours that they've accrued goes with them. So that is something else to keep in mind, and only for Michigan. So, if you have employees that physically work in Michigan, that's when it applies. So not for employees that work remotely, outside of Michigan or anything like that. So.
Correct. Yeah. ESTA only applies to employees who work in the state of Michigan. So you could, in theory, have this would only be these accruals would only apply to those employees. And Mary, that's a really great segue to my next question is, how does iSolve in particular, how complicated is it for iSolve to designate different accruals or different buckets of time, if you will, based on those classifications, such as location, salaried versus hourly employee. So, tell me a little bit about how iSolve tracks both the accrual and usage for hourly, salaried employees in different classifications that may have different accrual methodologies.
So in iSolve, you can build, an unlimited number of accrual plans, and we can create eligibility rules based on a lot of criteria. So it can be their pay type, whether they're hourly or salary. It can also be, we can create an organizational field itself. So it could be class that we call it, and we designate employees in that class, and then we can create the eligibility rules off of that. We also can tell it to exclude work locations that aren't in Michigan. So a lot of eligibility rules that we can play with there that make it pretty simple to apply the correct accrual plans to the correct classification of employees.
Wow. I think that's where a lot of clients, at least that I've heard from, are running into roadblocks, is where it's really limited as to how they can classify employees or how many accruals they can apply to different like classifications of employees. So again, it's always nice to hear there are some systems out there that are a little more comprehensive, especially if going through this for some of our clients, they come to realize that maybe their HCM isn't built to manage what they need it to do. Or as they're growing, knowing that there are solutions out there that may have that have that solution built in already. Gosh.
Right.
Gosh, Mary, you and your team are thinking ahead, helping us Michiganders and our confusing laws be prepared. Oh, goodness. We have so many wonderful questions. Thank you all for putting your questions in there. I know we're running short on time, so I definitely want to be respectful of all of your time, coming to us after the lunch hour slump. And hopefully, we've been, engaging and been exciting. Let's do one more question before we start to wrap up. Let's see, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Oh, I like this one. This may be a little more complicated. If your company provides a perfect attendance award, in this case, they said they provide it monthly. If the employee uses ESTA, does the company have to look at this as perfect attendance? This is tricky because there are different policies. If their only absences are due to ESTA related reasons and they had time accrued to cover those absences, again, like Mary had advised earlier, err on the side of the employee, and I would consider that perfect attendance. Yes, these are the nuances that, of course, the voter initiated ballots that were put in front of the legislature back in 2018 weren't thinking about these. I can almost guarantee that. Have you had, Mary, Jake, have you had that question from clients as well?
Most clients that I have talked to have just said that it's not going to count as an absence when it comes to those types of awards.
Yeah, that's definitely the avenue I would go to mitigate risk or be the least risk to the organization. Wow.
Exactly.
Again, you all have provided some wonderful questions. For those of you that provided your contact information, we'll do our best to get a copy of the Q&A and reach out to those of you individually. Also want to, share Jake's contact information. So if you want to learn more, if you've got questions in particular about MercForce, that you just want to bounce off Jake in general, there's a QR code for his contact information. Of course, we've also included his email and phone number. If he's not the technical guru, we know he's got Mary on call to help support you and answer the difficult questions, right, Jake?
Exactly.
Right.
So definitely, definitely feel free to reach out to Jake. Questions on how, what functionality you should be asking for or looking for within the HCM that you currently have. They can, advise you on that as well. Of course, at HR Collaborative, we offer free HR health assessments for all potential clients, anyone out there that's just looking for kind of a temperature gauge as to, is our HR function, what is the grade that we would give our HR function from A to E or A to F. We offer complimentary HR health assessments that one of our people strategists will walk alongside you through and kind of give you a synopsis of how your HR function is currently operating. And last but not least, big thank you to Jake and Mary from Mercantile Bank for coming and sharing their knowledge on MercForce, just what systems HCM should be doing, and what we can be asking our HCMs to do for us. And thank all of you for participating and tuning in for our webinar today. Appreciate all the questions. Please reach out to Jake or the team here at HR Collaborative if you have any questions or want to continue the conversation. With that, I wish you all a wonderful day, and we'll keep you abreast of any of the changing legislative updates that we're made aware of between now and Friday after next. So with that, have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.